The Old School is brought to you by Ahart Solutions, which provides school surveys and applied research. More information at ahartsolutions.com.
Uh,
And good morning. Welcome to The Old School, a podcast about the American education system, but we also dabble in other things as well. But today we go back to our bread and butter, our true calling, and we enter the world of education. And with me in this endeavor is my good friend, Dr. Stephen Bourgeois. Good morning, sir.
Herr Miller, good to see you and hear you this morning. Last time you were in England, and I felt I needed to shout to speak to you. I don't know why, but it occurred to me that you travel a lot, and now you're back home. It's almost like, when are you not traveling? It seems to be the case.
Well, you have traveled, but you just refuse to do any podcast episodes while you're traveling. I've tried to get you to strongly criticize the things that you experience on your trips, and you never do it. So,
Yeah, it's just not as funny. I prefer teasing you. That's our whole format. You know that.
I'm the fall guy. I get it. I understand.
That's how I like it. Well, I want to introduce a good friend, and we've been having great conversations for the past year. It sound maybe even longer, but I want to introduce Richard Marquez. Who every time I talk to Richard, I take about a page of notes, and and it's always those little tidbits that surprise me that I end up having to think it through afterwards. And he's actually helped my business with some of these ideas. So thank you, Richard, for helping Ahart Solutions, and more importantly, thanks for being here today.
oh, I'm happy to do it. You know that.
Well, wonderful. Well, I think just to tee it up, we always look at the resume points of somebody, and you've done all. I mean, again, it's almost like, what haven't you done? But give us kind of the elevator pitch of what brought you to where you are now.
Well, I'm one of 14 children. I'm a high school dropout, and went into the service, or should I say, the service. I got drafted and got my GED in the Army. And when I got out, one day I just decided I needed to go to college. I didn't have that brighter future, and so I quit my job, went to school on the GI Bill. I was married and had one child. Between my wife and I, we got me through college. I became a teacher, middle school, at Thomas Edison Middle School in Dallas. And in a short period of time, I was out of the classroom. I mean, I loved the classroom, and people would visit my classroom all the time. Uh, but I became a school administrator, assistant principal, moved to principal at no, assistant principal at middle school, assistant principal at high school, principal at elementary. From the elementary, I became principal at a 5A high school in Dallas. Uh, and interestingly enough, uh, those years at that high school made me quite famous. I was in I was in the newspaper's front page of what used to be the Dallas Times Herald. I was on the Christian Science Monitor. I was in Newsweek. I was on the front page of the Christian Science Monitor. I was on the Today Show, the Christina Show, because I was bilingual, and then eventually wound up on the Oprah Winfrey Show, and won some awards. I still laugh because I got a Lifetime Achievement Award from the Ford Motor Corporation uh, when I was just 43 years old. So I guess my life was over at that point.
So none of this has come up in our conversations. Your fame and fortune. So was there one event that pushed you into the public eye when you were the principal of that school?
Well, I one of the interesting look. I have a passion for the business, so and especially for dropouts, and so I try to prevent it in any way, shape, or form. So what I would do is I had a little red pickup truck, and I knew kids would skip school. So in the mornings, I'd drive around the school and wait for them to leave right after the first bell, and then pick them up down the street and bring them back to school. And then at lunch, they'd all like to leave the campus. You know how they are. It was no fences and so on and so forth. So I'd drive to the local restaurants and pick them up and bring them back to school. And in the afternoon, they all like to leave right around seventh period. So they'd find me out there at seventh period cruising the neighborhood. So I can tell you some great stories about about doing that, and that and a bunch of other things brought me a lot of notoriety.
Wow.
Uh, and that brought me to the attention of the people at the U.S. Department of Education. So
Okay.
one day out of the clear blue, they called me and asked me if I'd come there. And I said, well, who's going to pay? And I'm not paying. Uh, so I went there and they interviewed me. I didn't realize what they were doing. And they hired me to be the advisor to the U.S. Secretary on Dropout Prevention. And so I worked in D.C. for about 2 years, came home and was the area superintendent in Dallas. Uh, Worked there for about 3.5 years and went down to San Antonio as superintendent of schools in the Harlandale School District. Left there and went consulting with a friend of mine and eventually developed my own consulting business. And so I stayed consulting for about almost 10 years. And then in 2007, a friend of my accountant said, you need to take all those great ideas and put them in somewhere. And so he convinced me to take the job at the Texas Can Academies, which is for dropouts. It had the 10 schools at the time. They had 14 when I left. And so I was there for about 13 years. But I got lazy. Because things were running so well and I had such good staff. Uh, I actually got lazy basically I lost some of my passion and some of my fire. And so when I decided to retire, I wanted to get back into doing school improvement, which is what I was doing when I was consulting, improving schools and working with teachers and working with principals and working with kids specifically. Because I used to teach 5, 6 classes a day when I'd visit schools, basically to demonstrate to teachers how you teach kids how to read and how to think. So that's about it in a nutshell.
Well, that's a bunch, and
It's a big nutshell. So,
it sure is. And I mean, you and Ross have, early on in the story, have a lot of similarities. Um, and just to, illustrate our connection, with a dropout recovery, I was doing a presentation to a board for a credit recovery network locally, and before my work, and all I did was present my data results and tell the story about the culture and climate. But before I went on, they had Richard, who was giving some consulting to them, so I got on the Zoom and listened to him speak. And immediately I said, I need to know this man. And so we arranged a call, and we've just kept talking since then. And uh, I think, I want to hear kind of how you're gonna, what area you're specializing in, and you know, but how about you, Ross? What else, based upon what he said? You probably have some questions that came out of that too.
we're talking about the idea, not just with school dropouts, and that's something that it seemed like in my career it was something that happened on the peripheral, and I didn't have kind of like a direct knowledge of it. I knew it was a serious issue to be dealt with, but it was not something I directly confronted. The literacy issue, which is what you've also dabbled in, is something that has struck closer to home as far as like with my students, as far as them reading, understanding, comprehending, critical thinking, that sort of stuff. I want to present to you a quote that I read somewhere, and I cannot remember, sadly, the source of the quote, but I wanted to get your thoughts on it. It said that we are teaching our children how to read, but we're not teaching them how to enjoy and love reading. And when you think about the fact that at the fourth grade level, our reading levels seem to be pretty well, and then they get progressively worse as we get into the high school. I wonder if one, you think that that quote might point to a reason for those dropping rates, and if not, what is your thoughts on it?
Well, first of all, uh, what looks like a decent reading level at fourth grade really isn't.
Hmm.
Uh, because when you look at the numbers, it's basically says that about somewhere between 40 and 50% of the kids are reading below the basic.
Right.
That test, you have to understand how it's built. So it's below the basic. So there's a serious reading problem. And you knew it because when you had it in your classroom, you had those kids in your class who just couldn't read, but you didn't know what to do for them. Well, the same thing occurs in the first, second, third, fourth, fifth grade. It occurs when the child starts behind. They usually stay behind.
Richard,
And
we lost you for a second there. Can you move?
all
Yeah,
right,
there you go. You can
when
say
the,
that just
all
last.
right, right. When the child starts behind, they stay behind. They don't catch up. And the reason they don't catch up is because the system isn't built for that. The system is built kind of like an assembly line. You either get it or you don't. And if you don't, you eventually you just fall off to the side. And so, uh, and we just sweep it off the factory floor and we continue because we have another batch coming in right behind. So uh, that's a real travesty because we're dealing with humans here, and that value of that human being seems lost in a bureaucratic world of numbers and test scores. But when you look at those things, Russ, you could have taught those kids how to read. I don't know what subject you teach, but
He
with
does
what I've learned,
history, high school.
right?
Yeah.
Well, guess what? That's exactly my subject also. And so the you could have taught them to read. I could have sat in your classroom and I could have showed you exactly how you could use your social studies material and literally taught them all to read. But here's the thing, and you hit it perfectly when you said higher thinking, critical thinking, and comprehension. The development of critical thinking and comprehension comes through discussion and debate. And so it's the discussion of the subject matter that's in front of them that causes them to begin to think and causes them to begin to look at the material in front of them much deeper. That's how you foster the love of reading. When you can have deep discussions about the material that's sitting in front of them, regardless of the subject, they begin to understand that when you read something, there's a lot of information and a lot of possibilities for discussion in that text. And so reading actually is the key to everything. It if you can read, you'll never be victimized. If you can think, you definitely will never be victimized. You'll always be independent because you'll be able to make up your own mind.
Well, we've always heard that math is kind of the great equalizer, but particularly in Texas and most places, the math assessment is really a reading test, and so they're turning, language into math language and not necessarily solving for X. Most of the questions, about half of them at least, are just turning it into a numerical problem. So but I've seen a lot of studies where the gateway to dropping out or going to college is in eighth grade, and it's math and reading, and so you can predict at that point, the future. So is your approach to catch them, in eighth grade or sooner? When is the intervention point for your
Here's
program?
here's the here's the interesting thing, and this fact, and I've checked it. It makes perfect sense. Was given to me by the undersecretary at the U.S. Department of Ed, the assistant secretary. His name was Ted Sanders, and he was from Illinois. He was the chief schools officer before. Uh, but we were talking. He said, "Kids make the decision to drop out of school in the fifth grade." And he and I got into a discussion. And here's the way it works: when a child begins to fail, usually it occurs second, third, fourth grade. Or when that child realizes that they can't do the work like the other kids do, that's that kid that they pretty well drop out of the brain race. Now they don't drop out of school; they're too young, but they basically give up, and many of them become docile and just sit there and trudge along and do what the teacher tells them and not when they need to, and so on and so forth. But in their heads, they've already decided they're not going to go to college, and in their heads, they've pretty well decided that their world is relegated down to not much other than just work. And so they spend their time in school just waiting for the day when they're old enough or when they don't see a need uh, to drop out of school. And so that's the real travesty, because in every classroom today, or see, not today because it's Saturday, but in every classroom in a given school day, those kids are sitting there. And the irony and the travesty is that everybody knows they're there. They know them by name. They know that they're the failures. They know they were the failures before, and they're still the failures. And there's no intervention with those particular kids. And the gist of it is, if you track the reading of third graders, you can also track the prison population,
Mhm.
and you can track the dropout numbers. And it's all because if they don't read on grade level at the third grade, they're pretty well never going to get there.
So I wonder about, the typical interventions, and it seems like maybe the interventions are just so general. We're going to help these kids with their sense of belonging or their engagement, whatever that means, and not necessarily attacking the root of it, which is their reading simple. Um, so are they kind of working around the problem but not really addressing it?
One of the things that if we look at education, and any of all of us who were teachers understood that the education world was much simpler when we were in it. We didn't have all these programs being thrown at us, all these computers, all these things that are thrown at us. Uh, I remember being when I was elementary school principal, I walked into a kinder room, and kinder rooms used to just be nice little rooms where they had all these alphabets and they had all these books and all this, and the teachers had these little centers and so on and so forth. And then when I walked in to the kinder room, you couldn't walk through the darn place. There were so many pieces of curriculum and things, and just huge amounts of information and huge amounts of things. And that's what teachers are having to deal with. Every year they get a new system. Every year they get something complete, and none of it is new. It's always the same old stuff, just watered over with new titles and new names, and it's thrown at them, and they have to memorize it and know it, and otherwise get penalized by it. Uh, when we were in school, we'd see the principal maybe once in a week, or maybe once or twice a week. And today, they're in there every day for 15 minutes, maybe twice a day, and and things keep going down. So maybe they did. Maybe they ought to take a hint and, and stop doing all those crazy things because they're not working. As a matter of fact, they're pretty distracting. I kind of feel sorry for teachers today. My God, you feel like you're under a microscope. Uh, and everybody walks in with their damn tablets and things, and they're all writing. You know, they're writing all these things, and you're not privy to them. So it's just But they know, here's what I said to someone. We know so much about reading. We have all these doctors and all these great papers written on reading, and we have all these experts, and yet we can't solve the problem. And
What
and so, eh, look around. 40 years ago, we didn't have PhDs in reading, and we have them now. But 40 years ago, we read better. In 1964, our reading scores were the best, and our kids could think. And now we have all these PhDs in reading. We have departments of reading at the universities. We have reading departments at the schools. We have reading comes out, spend millions of dollars on reading programs, and it doesn't work. And everybody just seems to just walk along and say, well, it's the kid. The kid just, it's really them. And the travesty is that the kid can learn to read. Uh,
Yeah,
I taught,
I have a daughter that's in the fifth grade, and uh, I remember we got something from school 2 years ago, she's third, fourth grader, what have you, and something like Battle of the Books, and it was one of these programs designed to kind of encourage kids to read. And I asked my daughter, who is a ferocious reader, I said, "Are you interested in this?" And what she said actually made me quite proud. And I'm not telling this story just to bolster up my daughter, because Lord knows she has her problems. But but she told me, she said, Papa, I don't want to win awards. I just want to read the books. I don't want to make it a competition. And I must tell you, I cavilled about that statement for like the next 5 months. I was so proud that she refused to make it into like a competition. Now, I'm all about competition, but it seems like the world of education is perhaps not the best place for it. To what degree do you think that the efforts that people are making, being made by well intentioned, passionate people who want the best, but how much of their efforts do you think is actually causing the opposite effect?
well, it's actually causing much more damage because what they're basically doing is they're pushing the kids along. If you look at teachers' curriculum guides, it tells them where they need to be every day, every day. And education doesn't happen that way. When we were in the classroom, we weren't told where the kids needed to be every day. We were just told this is what the kids needed to learn. And then it was up to us to figure out a way to teach them. And so we had to use our best abilities to engage our kids and in some ways entertain them. Because you know that the best teachers always make the kids laugh. But at the same time, we're always able to get their point across and the kids all learn. Today, teachers don't have time to laugh. They've got too much work to do. And they've got too many people in their classroom checking to see that they're at the right place at the right time, doing the right thing day in and day out. And so there's no creativity in that classroom. You're given everything that you need to do. But we struggled with writing a lesson plan. Do you remember that? Having to write those lesson plans. And I remember when I had to learn to write a lesson plan. Well, the beauty of learning to write a lesson plan is that when you have a lesson plan, you know what it is you want to teach the kids. You built it, so you know what it is you want to teach the kids. So you do a much better job. Today, teachers don't build their lesson plans. They come with the curriculum. So the teacher has no deep understanding of what that lesson plan is supposed to do because they didn't build it. It's like, it's like anything else. If you build it, you have ownership and you give it value. If somebody builds it for you, you discard it. You don't even respect it, and it doesn't go anywhere because it doesn't have value because you didn't put any emphasis into it. You did no work. Uh, but if we all just settled down and decided that if a human being can read and think, that human being can make it through school regardless of the subject. Some of the research studies say that you can take a good reader with good comprehension skills, give them a math test, and they'll pass it. Now, they may not pass it with A's or with 100, but they're going to pass it because they're going to use their reading skills, take the math test, and figure out how to answer the questions. So, reading will change math scores. Kids do know math, by the way. They do know it. The only problem, they can't prove it. They can't prove it because the only way you can prove it is by taking a reading test. You said it, Steve. Taking a reading test. So if you can't read, you're not going to pass math. So if I teach you to read, you'll pass math also. You'll pass science. You'll pass everything else.
Yeah. Um, so a lot of folks talk about that if you just change the methodology, change it from, whole language to phonics or something, that's your magic bullet and you make one little pivot. But can you get into the weeds a little bit, like as a consultant, because I know you've done this, you've gone in and you've created a program. It had some peer element with the students, but it also has some technical things that they may not be doing. So can you flesh that out a bit?
Sure, sure. Uh, we've had an over reliance. They've had battles between the whole language and the phonics people, and it gets serious. I, ne- I never knew how serious those. I mean, those two sides, those two sides are. It's like wow, I mean, it actually literally gets dangerous if you find yourself anywhere in the middle of them. But the irony is, they both work, but an over reliance on one absent the other is just common sense. Not everybody learns the same way. So one works for one group, one works for the other. It's we've had a heavy reliance on phonics, a real heavy reliance on phonics, to the point when I listen to kids read, they make up words as they go because they see the beginning of the word and they'll add the rest of it and it's not even there. But it sounded good because it started with the correct sound. but but and you'd be amazed at how much of that I see. These phonic readers, they're not fluent at all. They move through the text, but they have no fluency whatsoever. And they're good kids, they're sharp kids, but they miss words, they add words, they don't pay attention to what they're reading, and so it's an over reliance on phonics. Uh, I use whole language because we speak in language, we speak in words. Our whole oral language is not broken up into sounds after we're about first and second grade. Our world doesn't come to us in sounds any longer. It comes to us in complete words and complete sentences. And so that's how we speak. So that's how the kids should be taught. Um, but here's what I would do. I would take those kids who are struggling readers and I would take them for one class period, usually their social studies class period, and I'd change the metrics for them. I'd do things different for them. Uh, the memorization game works. Reading begins with fluency, and fluency is just memorizing pictures of words. And a lot of times people try to memorize singular words. It'll take you forever. So if you memorize a sentence, but you memorize what it looks like and what the words look like, and you hear them, they have a tendency of sticking in your head. And the more often you pronounce that word and more often you read it, the deeper the neural networks are built. And so the longer it stays in your memory banks, to the point where eventually you do that enough with so many words, when you see them, they become automatic. Your ability to read becomes an automatic response because you can actually see that word and the sounds pop into your head. That's
It's
the
kind of
first
a
thing.
it's kind of a literary muscle memory that
You got it.
once you train the brain in one particular direction, you can apply that then to every verbal obstacle you run across.
You got it. Now, get this. You love this when I figured this one out. If I have a fourth grader, okay, what is done with that fourth grader who's behind, they give them what are called lower level but high interest books. I love that term. Lower level but higher interest. You're a dummy, but you're going to enjoy yourself. So, and what I tell people is, you don't have to do that. You don't have to do that. If I take a fourth grade text and I teach you to read fourth grade level material, I'm basically filling in your gap. And here's the reason why. If you look at fourth grade text is made up of first grade words, second grade words, third grade words, and new fourth grade words. So I don't have to go backwards to teach you. All I have to do is teach you fourth grade, and I fill in your gap of what you didn't have previously. So I don't have to dummy it down for you. I can actually use fourth grade material and teach you, but it's the method that I have to use that's important. And so basically, what I do with a kid is I'll have them read a sentence for me, just one sentence, get this, until they read it correctly. Then I'll add number two, the second sentence. All fourth grade material, fourth grade kid. Read the second sentence. The kid will read the second sentence, read it by themselves. Then I'll say, okay, read the first one and the second one. Then I'll add the third one. Do the same thing. Then I'll say, all right, read the first one, the second one, and the third one. And I keep doing that till I get through an entire paragraph. So guess what's happened? Can you figure out what happened?
They're definitely learning and seeing the patterns and storing it away. So it becomes theirs, with the repetition.
You got it. And so that immediately improves their fluency. And one of the amazing things with human beings is when they figure out they can learn something, they want more. And so they take off and become better students because they want it. They want to enjoy that feeling of success because they've never had it. Those kids never had success. All of a sudden they experience it and they'll work even harder. But that process doesn't take that long. But for some reason or other, nobody knows how to use it. And they tell me, get this, they say, well, we don't have the time. And they're not lying. I mean, they're not making it up. They're pushed so hard, they struggle to find time. Uh, but anyway, my kids, my third graders, uh, so you'll know, I taught a group of third graders who are good readers how to use my method to teach their classmates who are not good readers. And when I went to visit them last week, all the kids except two have improved tremendously. Every kid in that room has become a fluent reader. And the one kid who nobody thought could be taught to read is now reading. That kid, even I worked with him at one time, and I said, wow, this is a real hard case. But one of his classmates, using the method, actually taught him how to read. The teacher was telling me, he said, he read for me the other day. He only made one mistake. And I said, wow. So I figured out a way to beat them all and say, all right, you don't need money. You don't need extra people. You don't need any of that. I just need a little bit of time during their social studies period for you to let the kids teach the other kids, but they have to use this method.
Well,
So
Do
one
you
of the
remember?
things,
go ahead,
Go
Ross.
ahead.
well, one of the things that we've talked about before, and we bemoan about a lot, has to do with the presence of and the proliferation of technology. And some time ago, there's a poet and professor from the University of Pennsylvania that wrote a book called Wasting Time on the Internet. And he said that the internet, because the internet encourages skimming, it creates people who do not have the ability or the stamina for in-depth reading. But he said it was just a question of whether someone's interested. If you're interested in a subject, you'll read more about it, you'll read longer about it, and if you don't, you won't. Is the idea of technology as a stumbling block or an obstacle to growing literacy, is that overplayed? Is that over prescribed, or is there something to it?
Yeah, there really is something to what he said. Technology makes you superficial because you do skim, and technology makes you impatient. You want to just jump to the answer, and you don't take anything in depth. The way you get in depth, here's the Dr. Ruben Fierstein out of Israel said that only humans can teach other humans how to think, and the reason he says that is that a human can actually sit with you and you can discuss whatever it is you're reading, and that's how you go in depth. See, because I take you in depth. You don't know how to go to depth. You have to learn that it's a skill. So I have to guide you to that depth. And the way I do that is I have to discuss with you and I have to question you to move you to where I want you to go. And that's for you to begin to think on your own and to think in depth. So if you visit classrooms today, there's no human interaction. It's all one way. So they've got to stop at one point and have a class where teachers and kids get to discuss what it is they're reading and talk about it in depth. And so they're right. The uh, the other thing, because it's the technology is a linear platform, it's very difficult for you to go into depth uh, on technology on the platforms.
Well, so much money has been spent on infrastructure and trying to solve these problems digitally. And so you're talking about an intervention that essentially doesn't cost anything but time, as you said. And we are seeing the big picture where the test results are flatlining, or in the case of Texas, an eighth grade reading dropping, and we can no longer use COVID as an excuse. We've driven past that, so we don't need to hear that anymore. But how can a school implement this, particularly with older students? Because you talk about dropout recovery, it's almost like reading recovery. You get to a certain point where your reading level fossilizes and you're just not going to improve anymore. But can you do this to not to, but with older students as well?
Yes, at the can, what we did is we used to use the full classroom model. I built a full classroom model. I can show a teacher how to engage the kids in the reading and thinking using their own curriculum. And it only takes 20 minutes, and you can do it once or twice a week, and your kids are really get into the depth. But anyway, so the individual model, which I'd always had but didn't use a lot, uh, what we did is we took the special education students and the bilingual students, and we tested them and we put them into reading categories. And then they would either go to a person once, or, no, twice or three times a week, depending on uh, their particular level. And so they would go and they'd literally do the model for 10 minutes, basically 10 minutes, two times a week, three times a week, and so on. We started it in September, October. By December, when we gave the test, 50% of those kids who had failed the test before, and I mean they failed it many, many years, many for a long time, 50% of them actually passed the test. and they passed it because they could actually read it. Uh, that was to me that said it all. And so that's another reason why I retired, because I wanted to start pushing the system out,
Mhm.
because I knew it worked. But then COVID came along, and then everybody ran out of money. And but I didn't give up. I said I have to figure out a way to make it work where I don't need money. All I need is a little time. And so this model that I built for young kids, I think is the key. I think it's the one that will do it. Uh, I was thinking and talking to somebody just yesterday, and I said, I don't think I can run that model with sixth, seventh, eighth graders and so on, because they're too judgmental. A third grade kid isn't going to judge their peers. They're just going to do what you ask them to do. And they're much more faithful to the system. You should see those kids. They don't want to disappoint me. So they stick to that thing exactly the way I taught them. And when I quiz them, they'll explain it to me exactly the way I did it to them. But I think older kids uh, would be judgmental with their peers. Not all of them, but unless you can get the whole class to buy in, it doesn't work. So I think it has to be done at third and fourth grade. And I think if we do it there, we actually literally solve the problem. Now it will work with the older kids, but somebody else has to do it, and they have to do it at least 10 minutes every twice a week, if not three.
Okay.
Is there a country or a system that is a model for this as far as because I think the brilliance of your ideas is that they harken back to a time where we did not try so hard to complicate matters, but rather we were able to keep things simple because the answers lied in its simplicity. Is there other places, maybe other countries or other school systems that have been able to be that model for others who are trying to go down this path?
Well, let me give you an insight into something that I began to figure out. Uh, because when I was working with the people at the Fairstein Institute in Jerusalem, uh, they were working on cognitive development, the whole issue of thinking and why it happens and where it comes from and so on. And that's where the process of this uh, memorization thing sent me back into Dick and Jane, because that's exactly what it is. I began to look at when they started explaining the building of neural networks. But they didn't ever worry about reading at the institute. They never dealt any. They don't have anything at the institute that deals with teaching reading. And I asked Dr. Ben Hur one day. I said, Mayor, oh, you don't worry about reading. He said, no, our literacy rate is in the 90s, pushing 100%. And then I started thinking, and I said, oh, man. He said, what'd you figure out? I said, because of your religion, every one of your kids has to read the Torah in the synagogue. Every one of your kids is expected to read the Torah, and every one of your parents knows how to read the Torah. So every one of your people teaches the other kid how to read the Torah. So all your kids learn through their faith how to read. So they all know how to read Hebrew. And he looked at me and said, I never thought about that. And I go, yeah. I said, yeah, you take it for granted. But we don't have a mechanism like that. But we do have a mechanism like it. We just don't engage it. And we could use it in schools. Just using the same book read over and over and over again until that kid knew every word in that book. And you'd be surprised at what would come with the next book and the next book and the next one. That's how that kid that didn't know how to read That's how he learned it. We changed his method. We said, teach him this entire paragraph, and when the other kids move on to the next story, you don't move on at all until he learns all these words, all these sentences. And so we're only going to change this when he's learned it, when he's mastered it. And by doing that, that one child learned to read. So the rest of them all were all struggling readers, but they've all become fluent readers. So you're exactly right. We need to go back to a much simpler time, and then we need to allow teachers to use their brains to figure out ways to accomplish what we were asking them to accomplish.
So, is there anything short of changing the whole classroom structure? I mean, I'm just wondering about, we've done pullouts of readers. In fact, I experienced it in second grade. May not know this, Herr Miller, but initially I was not a great reader, and it came a little slowly. And so my second grade teacher, Mrs. Essig, pulled me out, and I had someone work with me one on one, and it didn't seem like more than a few weeks, and I was caught up, and the rest is history, right? I actually met her, um, about 8 years ago or so when I was back in Oregon, and my dad was with me then, and she said, "That's Mrs. Essig," and her husband, who does the commentary, or he's the voice of the Oregon Ducks, so he's kind of famous. And I saw her, and I walked over and said, "Well, I wanted to thank you, for helping me in reading at that time. And I have a PhD." And she was very emotional and loved that. But that was what they did back then. They just at the right time. Wasn't a huge deal. They didn't like put you in this special program with a group of. They just addressed it directly, and obviously, I didn't need to go back to that program after that.
Yeah, and it does work, but you have to have a method.
Right.
And see, and that's the interesting thing. They have all these pullouts and all these other things, but they don't have a method. I'll give you and this is dated because it has to be dated because it's been a long time since I was at the high school. Um, I went to see my reading classes in the ninth grade, and I walked in, I sat down, and I started observing. And the kids would come in, high schoolers. The kids would come in, they'd grab a magazine or they'd grab something and so on and so forth, and then they'd sit down and they'd all straggle in. After the bell, they're still walking in, and then they go pick up their stuff and everything else. And the teacher doesn't say anything, and I'm just sitting there observing. And I look at the kids, and they're just flipping pages, and they're going through all this stuff and everything else. So this lasts for 20 minutes. And so finally the teacher puts her things down and she starts teaching grammar. And I go, okay, so we're teaching grammar. Well, all right, well, maybe there's a reason for this and so on. So after the class, I asked I asked that teacher to come down to my class so we could talk. I mean, down to my office so we could talk. And I said, what are you doing? She said, well, it's the first 20 minutes, it's uninterrupted, sustained, silent reading, USSR. And I said, okay, so what are they supposed to be doing? They said, well, they're supposed to be enjoying reading and they're supposed to be, uh, picking out something they like and then reading it. And I asked her, I said, does that make sense to you? And she said, well, what do you mean? And I said, well, does it make sense? These are kids that don't know how to read or are struggling reading. And yet for 20 minutes, you're giving them time to do something they don't know how to do. That's it. So you're basically wasting 20 minutes a day. Uh, that's almost 2 hours a week uh, of wasted time. And you figure that over 180 days. And wow, look at all the instructional time that's lost. And I said, what were you doing? And she goes, "Well, I get to read too because I have to give them an example of how people need to read." And I said, "Okay." So she's sitting there reading Michener's Hawaii. That'll give you an idea how long it's been. But she's sitting there so we're paying her to read a novel, and that's supposed to be demonstrating to the students the beauty of reading. I'm sorry to say I've been in a lot of schools, but a lot of that still goes on. We give kids 20 minutes to read, and they don't know how. We give kids books to take home that they can own, and it's like giving them a rock because they don't know what to do with them. They can't read. Uh, so, you know, that whole thing about sending books home, they don't read because they don't have books at home. They don't read because nobody bothers to teach them how. And so somebody at home would have to teach them how to read, and not everybody in their households know how to read. They're products of our school districts. So it's like Dr. Furstein said, only a human can teach another human how to think and how to do things. So we have to have that individual human touch again instead of that drone approach to teaching every kid the same and using computers as a default to stick kids up there. And they stick the poor readers on computers, and those programs are supposed to teach them. And I still laugh because the research says that if you don't read at sixth grade level, you won't succeed on a computer as it is. You'll find the games. You'll definitely be able to find the games and some of the dubious websites, but you're not going to be able to read them.
Wow. Well, it feels like, well, from my perspective, everything you've said aligns with the old school. You know, it fits perfectly, and I saw Ross smiling more than usual, just like listening to your ideas. And I hope this is the first of many, because I think we're just scratching the surface. Not only in reading but in leadership and running schools and all these things that you've done. But this has been really, really fruitful, I think, and I would love to have you back, and I think Ross would agree.
I think
Yeah,
the tough, I think the tough
let me
part
say
about
one.
talking.
Go ahead, Rose.
Well, no, I just think that the tough part about talking with interesting people is that you have to stop at some point, and you have all these questions that pop
Yeah.
in your head, and you're thinking, man, we really need another 4 or 5 episodes here, I think, before we can kind of get down to the brass tacks of it all. But
Yeah, let me say one thing. Uh, I find teachers still caring. I find them they go into the business for the right reasons. I find the roses in the desert. Uh, when I worked at the Department of Ed, I visited campuses all over the United States, and I'd go to some places where there was barbed wire around the campus. And invariably, I'd go into that school, and there was a teacher that could teach lights out on anybody. And that teacher wouldn't leave that campus because they loved the kids and they loved what went on there, and they had a mission. And I don't think that's changed. I think that if we walk into any school today in this country, we're going to find some teachers who are doing an amazing job in spite of all the garbage that gets thrown at them. Those are the ones who understand how to teach, and no matter what program you throw at them, they always work around it, and they're always successful, so nobody messes with them. But they're the ones that close their door and do what they need to do. Uh, the problem is that the younger ones don't have that kind of confidence, and still can't accomplish what those individuals can do. So if you're lucky enough that your child winds up with one of those teachers, you know what I'm talking about. Uh, so, but I still believe most people, 90% of people go into the education business with the right intentions and the right heart.
well, we're going to try to have you back whenever you have time for us. But we will, on that note, and it's a hopeful note, because I think sometimes when people hear pundits or others, criticize or call into question, educational methods. I think what's lost is that on every campus, there are a host of folks that know what they're doing and are doing their level best. And even the folks that may not be as accomplished or as confident, they still have that desire to want to help. It's just a question of, you know, properly directing and mentoring those folks to be able to maximize, their opportunities in front of a group of kids. So, um, but Richard, I'm so glad you were with us today. I'm
Indeed.
so glad that you can make time with us, and I look forward to being able to speak to you again soon. Dr. Bourgeois, I think this we say adieu, auf Wiedersehen, however you want to say it.
Uh,
Adios.
uh, Vito saying it is for me. And again, thanks, Richard. We'll talk soon.
It was a pleasure, guys, and thank you for having me. Thanks for inviting me.
You
I really
betcha.
appreciate it. All
Of
right.
course.